Have you ever heard the expression, not in my backyard? Well, when it comes to certain crimes, for example, human trafficking, slavery, we feel anger and disgust for the criminals, our empathy for the victims. But we often take comfort. It's not happening here. It's taking place in distant countries and alleyways we would never walk through. The truth is, nothing could be further from the truth.
During a human trafficking sting,
3-year-old woman is charged with luring, confining, and selling the teens.
They might not even realize that this is a crime that is happening to them.
More than 100 charges have been laid against more than 90 suspects.
Targeted drug trafficking and human trafficking in Oshawa, Clarington, Whitby, and Ajax.
If you think it's not happening in your community, you are wrong.
Human trafficking and modern slavery are among the largest and most lucrative criminal industries. Globally, they're second only to drugs and cybercrime. According to the International Labor Organization, there is more people in slavery today than any other time in our history. Almost 50 million people, 27 million living in forced labor, 22 million in forced marriages. And the crime, it generates approximately $150 billion in illegal profits. Today, we're going to have 3 guests on the show. First, we'll hear from one of the most courageous individuals and someone who's told her story anytime people are willing to listen.
I didn't have a lot of people in my life, and that all I wanted was to be loved, right? I want someone to love me for who I am.
Her name's Kaitlin Bick. She's a survivor of human trafficking who had bravely turned her harrowing experience into a beacon of hope for others.
You don't have to do anything you don't want to do.
Caitlin's journey from being trafficked to becoming an advocate for survivors, you'll find both inspiring and eye-opening. And stay tuned until the end of the show, as we'll be joined by Carly Kalish. She's the Executive Director of Victim Services Toronto. Carly has been recognized with numerous awards for her dedication to working with survivors of gender-based violence, human trafficking, and sexual assault. She'll share her insights on the support system available for survivors and our ongoing fight against human trafficking. And last but not least is Jennifer Price, who joins us from Women's College Hospital to share what they're doing in partnership with Heart Helps to provide the training that frontline healthcare workers need to identify and support the needs of survivors. Kaitlin, I'll begin with you. Welcome to Chatter That Matters.
Thanks for having me.
So I'd love to just go back in time and talk to me about your childhood and your family. And I guess more than anything else, this interview I read it where you mentioned that even at a young age, you felt like something was missing and you didn't know what it was.
My childhood was normal, and I'm going to do some air quotes. It was my normal. So I grew up and there was love in my house. I had family. You know, I was that child that got to go on family vacations. I had both my mother and my father. They did divorce at a very young age. So I was about 4 or 5 years old. But I got everything that I needed. I had 3 brothers. I mean, they bullied me, but I think as the only girl, that's quite normal. I was vulnerable in the sense that I would look in the mirror at a really young age and not really like what I saw. I felt really insecure. I went to school and I was that kid in class that was too afraid to raise their hand and ask questions because I was afraid that everybody was going to make fun of me. I thought you would laugh at me and call me stupid. You know, I never felt good enough. I never felt like I fit in.
Was there any adult during that time that reached out to you, saw you as someone with these deep-rooted insecurities and said, you know, it's okay, and maybe help you find a path, even for brief moments of time you felt secure? Or was it always like you were standing on shifting sand?
There wasn't really anyone that reached out and said, hey, I can see you're struggling. I also didn't even really understand what was happening. Like, I don't remember learning in school about how to communicate what you're feeling. I didn't learn my feelings until I got sober. I thought that if you smiled, you were happy, and if you cried, you were sad. I didn't understand why I didn't feel like my friend Ashley or Emma felt, or, you know, why things came so naturally to people. But for me, it was so much harder. You know, my mom, she was the most beautiful human, bless her soul, but she was unwell. Everything we wanted, she did for us, but a lot of times she couldn't show up. She was in bed a lot because she really struggled with mental illness, unfortunately. So I didn't really have a figure in my life that I could go to. I didn't know how, right? I didn't know how to communicate or speak up. I was just full of fear. And I just tried to fit in and do what everybody else was doing.
And how about your dad?
I saw him about once a month for a couple of days. And he was what I know today to be jet lag. But back then when I was a kid, I just thought he didn't like me. I thought, he was always miserable and upset. And by the end of our weekend, he was starting to get kind of a little bit happier and better. So I thought, he's dropping us off. So he's happy. And that, couldn't have been further from the truth, but that's how I felt.
At age 12, you start trying to fit in by, using drugs and such. How did that all come about?
What I liked about it is that I felt like you thought I was cooler. You thought I was prettier. You viewed me as being a part of, and my whole life, I wanted to fit in. My gosh, I wanted to feel like, I was as cool as the cat's pajamas, and I just wanted that feeling of acceptance.
I think in one interview I did read, it said that this sort of crutch became an obsession and even an addiction. Is that fair to say?
I was dependent really quickly. There were a few incidents that actually happened in my childhood that, there was some sexual abuse. And then again, once I was I think I was 14 years old, I lost my virginity to rape. I felt like the situation that happened was my fault. And I didn't tell anybody because I didn't want my dad to yell at me. I didn't want to get in trouble. I didn't want to get, I told you so. So I put that big smile on my face and I just kind of went with the flow and carried that. And by 15, I was actually selling my body downtown Toronto for drugs because I needed, what 15-year-old makes that kind of money, right? So
did you have a relationship or confidence with either parent that you could have said, I was sexually abused or I was raped?
My mom had actually tried to take her own life and ended up in the hospital. She actually called Children's Aid herself and said that she was unable to care for her kids, which is quite brave and a really difficult thing to do. So she did that. And then my father moved back from where he was living in Singapore at the time to come and take care of us. So we moved from a small town to Toronto. So my addiction and my need to fit in just grew exponentially because I'm now in a new city and it's huge. I'm at a new school with all kinds of people and I was from a small town. So I was like, this is crazy. I feel like if I had the skills to go to my parents and say, hey, this is what happened, I feel like they would have opened me with loving arms. But I didn't have that skill. I didn't know how to do that because I didn't really understand what happened. I thought it was my fault. I thought because I said no, but then I froze. That meant that I consented and said yes, and that's just not true.
You're on the street, you're selling your body for drugs, and if that isn't enough to sink yourself into wet cement, you lose your mom at age 20.
It was extremely traumatic and difficult, especially because I was in a treatment program in the States from 15 to 18. They said your mom is bad because, she smoked weed with you once, and maybe not Mother of the Year, but also that's how she knew how to love me at that time. That's how she knew how to keep me safe at that time. So I said, you're right. She's terrible. You don't do that with your kid. And I stopped talking to her. I was about 19 years old. And I thought, oh my gosh, I haven't spoken to my mom. I always say she wasn't the best mom, but she was the most amazing friend. She was my best friend. So I called her. We reunited. She came to see me. I had my first apartment in downtown Toronto. It was the size of a shoebox and it was super expensive, but it was mine. And I just remember when she came and saw it, she was like, I'm so proud of you. She told me that she had cancer. And 9 months later, she passed away. So we had a very short time together. Again, I didn't have those skills to say, hey, I'm really depressed and I'm feeling sad. I need to talk to someone. I started drinking, and my jobs went from working in a French cafe and being up at 5:30 in the morning and finishing at 2 and going to school. I got accepted into university, which for someone like myself who felt, stupid and, just not good enough, I got accepted with a really high GPA. That's pretty dope. I ended up dropping out, and then I'm back to sex work because, again, I had $1,000 a day habit. So you can't really work a regular job with that kind of addiction.
Another thing happened to you at age 24. You're in a trap house, which you've described as a house for drug dealers. and you meet who you feel is your Prince Charming.
Mm-hmm.
But instead of Prince Charming pulling you into a fairy tale, it turns out to be a nightmare.
I was doing what we call circumstantial sex work. So again, I was a substance user and, I was exchanging sexual favors for substances or money. And somebody that I bought drugs off said, hey, come to this house. I got some buddies over. My guy, he came in, he looked at me and he started asking me a whole bunch of questions. It wasn't so much the fact that he was trying to engage with me, but he was asking me questions that were super inappropriate. Like, when you meet someone, you don't ask like, have you ever been abused? Or like, why are you doing this and being like gathering a whole lot of information about me. That's just, it's a little much for a first meeting, but I felt special. I felt part of. I felt like this person, he didn't want anything from me, which was kind of weird, but it was also really enticing. And I felt good. And he was giving me free drugs, which again, for someone of my vulnerability, struggling with substances was huge. Like I didn't have to do anything that I didn't want to do. And he just gave it to me for free. And we hung out a little bit. It went pretty quickly. So, with the luring and all that, like from when someone's lured to actually being exploited, it could be any amount of time. For me, it was quite quickly. So I was very vulnerable.
Do you have even any radar when you're in that situation where, the drugs are so compelling that they become blinders? I mean, is there any sense that this is too good to be true, or you just get swept up in a story like that because you're just looking for something that's good?
I mean, 100% it was too good to be true. Safety wise, this was way safer for me than posting my own ad or working in a massage parlor or seeing multiple people. I didn't have to do anything I didn't want to do. And this guy was giving me free drugs. So it was a no-brainer because I explained to him that I didn't really have family in my life. I didn't have a lot of people in my life, and that all I wanted was to be loved, right? I want someone to love me for who I am. He latched onto that, and that is what he used against me, right? He told me he loved me. He told me that I was beautiful, and he just showered me with compliments. I met his family. I met his kid. He had a really small kid, and he invited me in, and I just bought everything.
And where's your brothers and your dad at this time?
So they actually cut me off for about 5 years, pretty much right after my mom passed away. I wish that they were there. It was the darkest years of my life. But I recognized that they had to do what they needed to take care of themselves.
So this boyfriend of yours, he's taking you to meet the parents. You meet my kid. I'm also feeding you with drugs. He tells you that he's taking a road trip to Calgary. Prince Charming was going to take you away in a carriage.
I don't know if anyone's been to Calgary in January. It's not really exciting. It's so cold. But
maybe a sled, not a carriage.
Yeah, exactly. We were going about 20 kilometers an hour in a BMW with no winter tires. But it was the feeling of being a part of. And this person, wants to take me somewhere. It could have been anywhere. And I still felt special. You don't have to do anything you don't want to do. We actually ended up getting pulled over in Marathon, Ontario, because we had weed smoke billowing out the window. So we got pulled over, and the officer pretty much was just like, you guys are under arrest. And he had taken both guys in one car, and I was separated. And we go back to the station. They pretty much took everything. They took my shoes, the drawstring in my pants, it's freezing. I was sitting there in leggings or sweatpants and a tank top alone in a cell. The officer ended up pulling me in, and he started questioning me. Who are these guys you're with? And I said, well, it's my boyfriend and his friend. And he asked me, what my boyfriend's name was. And I was like, it's Mikey. And he said, that's not his name. I was scared. I was like, inside, what do you mean his name's not Mikey? This is crazy. But I put that smile on my face, and I looked real cute. And I was like, oh, well, what are my options here? What am I going to do? Are you going to save me? Are you going to give me drugs? Are you going to feed me? Are you going to take me to Calgary? And then he ended up telling me that, it wasn't my boyfriend, and that they had said I was just some stripper they picked up who needed a ride. And again, I just kind of shrugged it off.
And then when you guys get out, this is when it really starts realizing that this isn't a relationship with a boyfriend. This is, in fact, a relationship with a pimp.
What happened was his friend took the charges. So I, again, was like, oh, see, they're my friends. Because who takes a charge for someone? That's crazy. But his friend did. So I felt like, wow, okay, this is all working out. We were sitting in the car outside the station waiting for his friend to come out. And he said, you're going to have to work now. He took the charges. You're going to have to pay for the lawyer. You're going to have to pay for the hotels. You're going to have to pay for this whole trip. This is all your fault. If you didn't bring drugs, we wouldn't be in this situation. Now, he's a drug dealer. I brought a very minimal amount and he had everything else. But in my head, I'm like, oh my gosh, you're right. This is all my fault, right? I said, yes, I'll do anything you want me to do. From there, I felt like I had consented, and human trafficking, I have no idea what that is. It happens only in other countries, right? Not to small town people who grow up in nice families. Our first stop was the mall, and his friend brought me in to get, lingerie, and my ad was already being made on Backpage. They took pictures of me. They told me how to pose. They put my face in the pictures, put what services I was going to provide. Nothing was in my control. But again, I said yes because I wanted to make up for my mistake and what I did wrong.
Can I ask you a personal question? This boyfriend, this Prince Charming, were you having sex with him, or was it just purely this relationship where he gave you love in one hand and the other hand basically abused and humiliated you?
Yeah, we were having sex. Would say things like, with the clients, it's just sex. You're using a condom. It's, that's one thing. But at the end of the day, you're coming home to me and I'm going to take care of you and I love you and everything's going to be fine. While we were out there, it was started that time of the month. And I told him, and his response, instead of, oh, okay, let me, get you some Tylenol, or let's just go to sleep or rest or anything that any normal boyfriend or partner would do, his response is a little bit vulgar, but, was to put a sponge inside me and say, oh, it's okay. This is going to work and you can still work.
Oh, man.
And it makes me sick today because I needed someone to love me so bad.
You mentioned, and one of the hardest things for me, because I'm a father of two beautiful daughters, is that you talked about the invisible bars that prevented you from escaping. And I guess that's what it was. It's just in bars where your need to be loved, your need to feel that somebody actually cared about you.
I didn't want to be there. I didn't want to do those things, but I wanted him to be proud of me, right? I wanted him to love me and tell me that I did good. And I had clients that were like, it was the guy sitting outside, is someone taking your money? And I was like, no. That's just my friend making sure, everything is safe. Or I don't know who that is. They're not here for me. But it was literally the guy would leave, friend would come in and take the money, and it was just exchange to exchange. I kept nothing. And it was for my protection. It was so that, the money was safe. And so that, he would come in and check on me to make sure I was safe. Told me, if anything happens or you're ever scared or anyone's ever, being aggressive, just call me and I'll be there in a second. And I remember having an aggressive client and it was really bad. And I called him and he was getting a haircut and he told me, everything was going to be okay and he'd be there soon. And he didn't show up for probably about an hour.
What an animal. And how did you escape? And let's talk about your path to recovery.
We ended up leaving Calgary. So I kept complaining, rightfully so. It was January. So it was coming up to February. My mom's birthday is February 21st. And I kept saying, I need to be with my family. I need to, I'm just complaining. And he had just had enough. He was like, fine, but we're coming back. So we get home. I was living in Scarborough in a 2-bedroom. There was absolutely nothing in my apartment. There was a couple of bags of clothes, maybe some toilet paper. I had nothing. It was completely empty and a foam mattress. I don't know what I was doing. I think I had my dad's old laptop or something. I was watching something and the news, there was his face and it said wanted for kidnapping, guns, drugs, just a whole slew of charges. And I was like, oh my gosh, I just went across the country with this guy. I can't believe this. Just to give you a real big perspective on the trauma bond is, what do you think I did? Normal people, I feel would be like, oh my gosh, I'm never talking to this person again. They're so dangerous. But I actually called him and I hid him in my apartment because if I just do one more thing, he's going to love me again.
Wow.
It's going to go back to how it was in the beginning when he told me that I was beautiful and he loved me and I didn't have to do anything I didn't want to do, like in the beginning. And the most terrible part of all of it is that it never goes back to the beginning. It only gets worse. He ended up turning himself in and then he got released. And I don't know the legal system very well. I don't know how that works. It wasn't bad enough for them to arrest him and keep him in jail. So We lost contact after that, and I consider myself very lucky. I actually ended up doing some circumstantial sex work again, right? The trauma. My brain was like, okay, I know how this works. I can do my own ad. I can post what I want to do, and I get to keep all the money for myself. My addiction just skyrocketed. It got so much worse. But through all of this, there was actually an officer that was in my life, and he was there for me when I was at my absolute worst. He was there for me when I would call at 2:00 in the morning, convincing him that I had skin eating disease. He was there when I was leaving the hospital after an overdose. Have you eaten today? Do you want to grab a coffee? Do you want me to bring you a donut? Because we would joke about donuts because he was an officer and I would always make fun of him. And he was there through everything. When I did work, I would actually text him, this is where I am. And this is the room number if you don't hear from me, because I didn't have anybody else. And if he wasn't there, I don't think I would be alive today. So I ended up getting out actually because of him, because he was the person that I went to when I was ready to speak. And not because I thought I was trafficked, but because I thought I had a really crappy boyfriend that did terrible things to me and he needed to pay for what he did to me. So he's the person I called when I got out of rehab. He showed up and he asked for nothing.
How long now have you been clean and sort of really doing this heroic work of helping other people, survivors of gender-based violence and human trafficking?
So my sobriety date is April 30th, 2015. So I'm just a little over 9 years.
Congratulations.
And actually, because of that officer, he introduced me to, which is the human trafficking enforcement team. And they connected me with victim services, and then victim services actually connected me to Carly. Carly was my trauma therapist.
And Carly's going to be joining us in a minute. That's wonderful.
This is full circle. So when I first met her, I was a little bit loony. And I was convinced that, she didn't know that I was high. And I remember our first session, I was all like, kind of spinning. In our second session, I was like, I need to tell you something. I was high last time. And she's like, I know. But again, showing up, she showed up for me. She was there for our sessions. If I couldn't show up in person because I couldn't get out of bed, we did a session on the phone, and she was patient with me. She didn't judge me. She met me where I was at. She knew I was still doing sex work and I couldn't stop, and she didn't judge me. She said, just make sure you're safe. And she provided me with those skills and tools to be safe. And then I actually ended up getting a job there as a peer support worker. And that's where my journey in this field began. And it was really scary. And it took, doing a whole lot of work on myself. And I still have to do all of that work on myself because the work is hard. But that's where my journey really began. And so I would like to say too, at my 1 year medallion, my dad and brothers actually showed up. And that was the first time that we had connected in 5 years. And the police officer that was on my case, he also was at my 1 year medallion. And they're all still in my life today.
Kaitlin, a final question. Do you think that you went through all you went through was to set you up today to help other people?
There's other people out there who are still experiencing this time and time again. And I will tell you that when I meet with my clients, call them friends, it is so unique. And the bond that is created is so special for me. I go home, sometimes I cry, not just because I'm sad, but because I wish I had that. I wish from the bottom of my heart that I had someone that came to me and said, I know how you feel.
My 3 takeaways, the first was this sense of trauma relationships. If there's someone in your life that's feeling very insecure and anxious and really not knowing where they are or not standing on firm ground, painting on that smile. It's so important we pay attention to these people because they are easily lured because the sign of a simple flower being offered to them would be like a bouquet being offered to most. So the second one really is this Prince Charming who showed up in terms of not the trafficker, but your officer. He asked for very little in return, and I bet you as he looks at his career, as he leaves this life, he'll look back and say one of his most important moments, meaningful moments, was meeting you and helping you get to where you are today. And then the third thing that I want to end with is the words, I am so proud of you. How your mom said that when she saw you in that small apartment, how she must be looking down from heaven and beaming with the smile that's not painted on her face, but is a smile of just joy that you found a way through what she probably couldn't, not being mentally well. And the fact that you're dad was there, your brothers are there, they're still there. So many people are proud of you. One tough lady who's overcome some of those horrific circumstances to be courageous enough, that little kid that didn't lift her hand in the classroom, be courageous enough to tell the story the way you're telling it. So I am so proud of you as well.
Thank you, Tony.
When we return, one of Kaitlin's true guardian angels is Carly Kalish. She's the Executive Director of Victim Services Toronto, to provide more insight in this horrific world of sex trafficking. And then Jennifer Price, the VP of Clinical Programs at Women's College, teaming up with Heart Helps to show us what they're doing to help frontline workers.
We've just created a new strategic plan for 2024 to 2030. It has 3 pillars, really trying to use the resources that we have in place, educate them quickly, and move forward.
One of the vilest crimes against humanity is sex and human trafficking. It's estimated to be over $120 billion worldwide, and is happening in our backyard and often goes unseen. And for survivors, their journey to freedom and healing is filled with barriers. And our healthcare system, while well-meaning, often lacks the training to recognize and support them when they reach out. Well, big shout out to the Heart Foundation, which stands for Human Anti-Trafficking Response Team, and the Women's College Hospital. Together, they've launched a vital new initiative, a program to learn what survivors of sex trafficking need most, what truly helps, and what healthcare professionals can do to offer safe, trauma-informed care. Through the Astor Project, Heart and Women's College Hospital are creating training programs so medical staff can recognize and respond to survivors with empathy and expertise, offering them the respectful care they deserve and access to community support for their unique needs. And their dream? A country where every medical professional can identify, protect, and support survivors, guiding them towards a life free from trafficking. This is more than healthcare. This is hope. Help Heart, spelled H-A-R-T, and Women's College Hospital make this dream a reality. Find out more at hearthelps.com.
You know, these traffickers, they use our vulnerabilities against us because most of the time we don't know what they are. We don't know that they exist. We don't know how to identify them. I look in the mirror and I think, okay, I don't really like the way I look or feel today, but you know, I'm moving on with my day anyways because I can identify them. So we need to really accept the fact that it's okay to not be okay. It's okay to not like yourself every day. It's okay to teach your kids that's all right. There's nothing wrong with you. You just have to own them. And you have to accept the fact that no one can use them against you if you know what they are. And that's all right.
Joining us now is Carly Kalish, Executive Director of Victim Services Toronto. Tell me about your organization and what you're doing to support survivors of human trafficking.
Victim Services Toronto helps people in the immediate aftermath of crime and sudden tragedy. We operate 24 hours a day. We physically go to the scene of the crime. We're not part of the police, but often police or fire departments will call us out so that we can hold the hands of survivors, accompany them to the hospital, walk them through their hardest moments, walk alongside people, and help people rebuild their lives.
How did you end up there, deciding that this was your calling?
I mean, I'm a social worker. I was always interested in women and what society deems deviant. And I would say to my mom, like, what's wrong? Why are people who are doing sex work criminalized? I never understood that. She'd be like, this is a bizarre question to have with, you know, your 13-year-old daughter. After my undergrad, I actually moved to West Africa. I lived on a brothel with this incredible woman who ran a nonprofit in Kumasi, Ghana. She worked with women in the sex trade who and doing like HIV prevention work. And so I moved in with her and her family, and to learn about her work. And I fell in love with these women and their resilience and their capacity to be so strong and also experience so much trauma and then be so strong. It's just, you know, it's like there's no one else I want to work with.
Heart Foundation and Kelly Greer is making this show possible, and we're doing another one on it. And how do you find a way to be so magnetic that you attract other people that have either the intellectual, emotional, or financial resources that can help you get to where you want to be? Because a big part of your job must be not just the work you love to do, but you also have to make sure that you're attracting other people to support this mission.
You can tell that a mile away. You meet someone like Kaitlin and you see that she's meant to do this work. Like, it's just in her. And we're fortunate to have a team of 60-something people who are all like Kaitlin's, right? Like these people that are committed to helping people through crisis, through crime and sudden tragedy. Like literally our team, is holding the hand of a mother who just lost her son to homicide, or is at the hospital of a family who just lost their child to SIDS. Like you have to be a certain sort of person to stay calm in other people's worst moments.
I want people in Canada to be aware that what we're seeing and hearing, even from Kaitlin's story, is not an anomaly. I mean, this is truly happening in our backyard. How prevalent is it? And what can parents do and good neighbors do to keep an eye on it, to try to do their part so that you're not needed as much?
There's a lot you can do if you suspect your child is involved in this, or your student, if you're a teacher, is involved in this. And there's a lot you can do just to protect your kids in general. I am a mom of 2 daughters, and I say it's never too early to teach your kid about consent. And you don't have to talk about sex necessarily when you're talking about consent. I have a 3-year-old and her name is Sunny, and I bring a hula hoop and I say, Sunny, who's allowed in your hula hoop? If someone comes in your hula hoop without permission, what would you say? Who would you ask for? Right? Like you're teaching kids the antidote to human trafficking without them even knowing it. So there's so much work you can do to keep your kids safe. And if your kid is involved in this, like the thing to do is to not judge them and to love them indefinitely. Sometimes we have parents call us and say, my kid is trafficked, but she only has 1 credit left in school. So when I can only talk to her once a week, she calls me, she's allowed to be on the phone, and she says, you only have 1 credit left. If you go to school, you could change your life. And I'm like, I'm sorry, but like, that's the opposite thing you should be saying to your kid. You should say, I don't care what it is that you're doing. I love you. I love you. I love you. Come home. I think that's a really hard conversation for us to have with parents, but I think they need to know it. And VST does a lot of things in terms of like prevention workshops where, we're in every TDSB school who wants to have us talking to young people about healthy relationships and consent and boundaries. We offer workshops to parents about how to keep your kids safe online, how to have these difficult conversations with parents. There's a lot we can do to prevent this. And I mean, the overall prevention work that has to be done is systemic prevention, right? Like this is a crime of gender-based violence, and we have to address that systemically in terms of targeting, patriarchy and poverty and all of these major pieces.
Kaitlin and Carly, we're so blessed as a society that there's people like you. Kaitlin, that you've got context, that people you talk to, you could say, I was there. I know what you're going through. And Carly, just providing that knowledge to parents to say, I don't care what happened. You're not an embarrassment to me. I love you. A shout out to Kelly Greer for being at Heart Foundation, making sure that we can spread this out in social media and stuff. So thank you to all.
Thank you for having us, Tony. And thanks again, Kaitlin, for just being exceptional.
So joining me now on Chatter That Matters is Jennifer Price. She's the Vice President, Clinical Programs at Women's College Hospital. She also holds a PhD and an acute care nurse practitioner certificate from the University of Toronto. Jennifer, welcome to Chatter That Matters.
Thank you so much, Tony. I'm pleased to be here today.
There's so much you're doing at Women's College, and we could spend a week talking about it, if not a lifetime. But I really want to focus in on what you're doing with this Aster program and really trying to help healthcare professionals recognize and support survivors of sex trafficking.
So we at Women's College recognize that frontline staff are uniquely positioned to help persons who are identified as sex trafficked. They are in a good spot to treat and protect and even determine people's risks for becoming trafficked. However, many healthcare professionals actually don't know very much about sex trafficking or even very much about trafficking in general. And they often feel that they lack the tools to provide care. So we, in collaboration with the Heart Foundation, developed a research and education program called Aster, addressing sex trafficking through education and research, that is going to provide better data-driven policies and protocols and to address and prevent sex trafficking in Canada.
You could be treating somebody that is being a victim of being sexually trafficked or part of human trafficking. And that doesn't come out naturally in a conversation.
And I think what can happen is the trafficker is actually in the room with the person, ostentatiously as the boyfriend or something else. Also, people who are victims of sex trafficking are mistrustful of society, of healthcare, so not necessarily forthcoming. It's really important to provide care in a trauma-informed manner because people who are victims of sex trafficking are trauma victims. And we need to make sure that we treat them in a safe space, in a non-judgmental manner. We need to respect them, to treat them with dignity. We need to afford them the ability to trust us as healthcare workers. And we need to really think about what we're saying to people so that we avoid triggering language that could re-traumatize. Really want to empower them to make the next step without forcing them.
With so much pressure on healthcare, how did you find the time and the resources? Because to me, this is as much preventative. And, you're talking about educating workers, educating the police force. I'm curious how you found the time to do it because you have so many priorities on Women's College.
We've just created a new strategic plan for 2024 to 2030. It has 3 pillars, the first being sex and gender in health, the second being equity, and the third being reimagining an approach to care with and for patients. So I see this sex trafficking work really combining all aspects of those pillars, which does mean that we put a big priority on it. It is about equity because often these people are from vulnerable populations. It's about sex and gender because they often present through a gynecology clinic or sexual assault, domestic violence, or an ED. So it's really about reimagining how we deliver care and training up the people that we think are going to be the most important to meet with sex trafficked victims. So really trying to use the resources that we have in place, educate them quickly, and move forward.
Jennifer, thank you so much for joining me on Chatter That Matters.
Thank you for having me.
It's Tony Chapman. Thanks for listening. Let's chat soon. Once again, a special thanks to RBC for supporting Chatter That Matters. It's Tony Chapman. Thanks for listening, and let's chat soon.